Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Division 3 October webinar. I see just a few more people in the waiting room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First, a PDF of this presentation will be on .org later on today. A recording from today will be available by the end of the week. And as you have questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will monitor that and answer questions as we go, or at the end, if that makes sense. I'm Laura Peterson. I'm a director in championships. I oversee cross-country and indoor and outdoor track and field, and then I also serve as a primary liaison to the championships committee. And so what we're going to talk through today is really the culmination of work of the championships committee dating back to probably February 2022, so a good while. So we're going to talk through some budget enhancement considerations that the committee is currently considering to go into FY 25 and 26. We're going to give an update on the selection criteria database that we've been considering, and then also an implementation timeline for these potential budget enhancements and also the potential implementation of this new selection criteria database. So we'll start with the championship budget enhancements. So again, like I said, dating back to February of 2022, the championships committee started to review its budget priorities and kind of set a list of things that we would, when we have dollars, this is the order that we would consider them. So we've gone through several iterations of that. And then one of the first opportunities that the membership had to help us with input was back in May of this year. We sent out a budget survey to the membership and commissioners to provide feedback on a set of, I believe there were 9 or 10 budget enhancements that we were considering, which range from per diems, the ones you see here, bracket expansion, permissible flights, use some others in there as well. Out of that survey in May, the committee reviewed that in June, and really 4 top things came out of that. Per diem, travel parties, bracket expansion, and permissible flights. Those really rose to the top of the options that the committee put out for survey. So the ones that you see here are the ones that the committee is going to continue discussing as we're preparing for our next fiscal cycle. I'll walk through them slowly. And so again, if you have questions, make sure you put those in the chat. The first thing I'll note on per diem is that we had a planned increase to $125 per diem and $55 host per diem set for 24-25. Because of our overage in our budget, AdCom asked the championships committee to consider increasing that for this year. So effective for our 23-24 championships was just 1 year earlier than what was intended. Our championships per diems will increase to $125 this year and $55 for our hosts. So that again was planned already for 24-25, but we're actually going to implement it in this year to help offset some more costs for our institutions competing in championships. So that's great news for us. The things we're going to consider still with per diem, just the committee really wrestled with per diem versus travel parties and kind of 2 different ways to get at, to take 2 bites of the apple of how to get money back into our institutions' pockets. And really, we decided that per diem was the way that we were going to go, because if we can increase per diems, we can get more money into your pockets. And then it gives an institution more authority to say, well, we're going to bring X number of people because this is what our budget can cover. So we're going to still consider increases in per diem beyond the 125 into potentially our next budget cycle. So we'll be looking at some increases for that in the per diem space. The next thing that we're talking about is bracket expansion. And really, it's pretty obvious what that means. But we're also we're considering a football bracket expansion, which we know needs to be addressed, and that is separate from any other potential bracket expansion. Maybe they both happen, but we really know that football is an issue that we need to tackle regardless of if other expansions happen. So this one, not like per diem could be increased per policy. Bracket expansion was something that would take a legislative change. And so that might take a little bit longer timeline, but we are considering different forms of bracket expansion. There might be some different ways to get at the bracket expansion. Currently, we are at a 1 in 6.5 access ratio for team sports, and that was established back in 2003, I believe was the convention vote, so our 03-04 championships. And at the time that made sense. We had kind of gone into this era of the AQ developing, more multi-sport conferences coming online, and going to this 1 in 6.5 was a way to preserve the Pool C berth, so that at-large access as our landscape was changing with AQs. And so this form was a way to preserve that for us. And we've seen with the growth of our multi-sport conferences that we have some championships that Pool C berth, those true at-larges, are really dwindling. And so we are considering different ways to keep up with that changing in our AQs. And so trying to still have that access for our at-larges. So we're going to be looking at some different ways to potentially expand the brackets that might make sense. And some of those might include if we change the access ratio, or if we change, sorry, I'm going off of my notes here. So just different ways to get at that. Does it make sense to change the access ratio? Does it make sense to change how we apply it in general? So we're going to be looking at bracket expansion in different ways with that. The next item that we will still be considering is our permissible flights. So again, this is one that would take a legislative change, because currently our legislation states that we create brackets based on a regional basis, and geographic proximity takes precedent over any sort of seating regionally that we have. So changing that would be a change to our legislation. We also currently have that we don't make conference opponents play each other in the first round. Maybe permissible flights extends to conference opponents not playing in the first or second round. Or is it something that we look to more separate our top regionally ranked teams? So you could go to different sites. There's still a little bit to be digested with that, whether it would be, is it 2 more flights? Is it as needed? So there's way more to be decided with that. But really allowing potentially some more flights to help keep the integrity of our championships is also a priority to the championships committee. We will also be considering, with this slate of information, we will be considering some sport-specific requests. So that might mean that, for example, my track and field committee, we have some things that are specific to us. They happen to be per diem, but we'll also be looking at some other things for some of our sports, wanting video review at the final site. So we'll have several one-off requests from sport committees that will also need to be considered when we are looking at how to spend these new dollars. So those will be the major buckets that we'll be looking at. The last part on this is that we're developing currently a second survey to go out to the membership. We plan on having that late October, early November. And what we are going to do in that is to be asking some more specific questions about these budget concepts, and also some different questions on the philosophy of how we conduct championships. Like, is Pool B still something that we find that is necessary? And so we will be sending that out. We plan to have that out open for about 3 weeks. And so the championships committee can review that data during our December meeting. And then we can we will use that then when we're making our final decisions in February of 2024. Just going to look over my notes here, make sure I covered everything that I meant to, and I don't see any questions yet, so. Great. So the next topic that I wanted to talk to you about is selection criteria database, also known as pairwise. It's not exactly pairwise, but it's essentially pairwise. So the championships committee has been discussing this again for about 18 months. So we've made some progress on this. We've been working with Tim Danahy, who is the mastermind of the pairwise system. And we worked with him. We took a set of 6 of our championships. So we took field hockey, women's soccer, football, men's basketball, baseball, and one other one. We took 6 championships. Anyway, the point of that was to get a good cross-section of our championships in our initial review. So field hockey is a fairly low sponsored sport, and they play 18 to 20 contests. Soccer, we know, added the detail of ties this year. So we wanted to also see how that played into the data. Football is obviously only 10 contests, and that's we wanted to see what that looked like. Basketball, they have a high sponsorship, 25 contests. So we wanted to see that. Then baseball, softball is one that, you know, they play 40 contests. So seeing a large sponsored sport with a high number of contests. So how did all of that look? And because the way that the database works, we were able to take data for those 6 sports from the 2020 year, so a pre-COVID full-on year, then also 2021. And we were able to run the data of what the system would have generated based on the data versus what the committee actually chose. Not that it had to be perfect for the selection criteria database to be a good metric, but we could see, were we on track with what we were doing? And so in that initial review, what the system came up with and what committees came up was very, very similar. And so once we saw that, we decided to keep moving forward with getting some input from our sport committees. So that's kind of where you start seeing this timeline here. So after we went through a pretty hefty review, we met with our championship managers and our sport committee chairs, and we had a session in May and a session in June to help educate our staff and also our committee chairs. We were able to show them the system. We were able to have them ask questions, poke holes in it, and so we were able to give them an education on that. Then in August, we used the same platform to be able to educate our sport committees fully, so the chair plus the other committee members, and also our full regional advisory committees. So with those groups, again, we were able to answer questions, poke holes in it, and get some feedback on it. And generally, we've heard pretty positive feedback. Our next round of feedback on this topic is going to be from our sport committees officially. So we'll have a set of questions that we'll be asking to our sport committees for them to give feedback for the championships committee to consider if we were to move forward with this. And should they make a recommendation similar to our budget items, that recommendation would go forward in February of 2024. There is a budget impact with it. We've been working through this system to be able to bring it in-house. So part of that is, you know, being able to get that infrastructure up and running. It is purchasing the algorithm from Tim Danahy. So that would be presented in the 2024 February meeting to go forward with all of our budget items. SPFC would be able to review this specifically, but also our other budget recommendations in March. It would go to Management Council in April. And for the selection criteria database, the first potential year that this would be in place for is 24-25. We still have some vetting to do with it. Again, we haven't had official sport committee feedback, but that would be the earliest that it would go into play. The committee on this is also still considering different ways that we can engage the RAC members. They wouldn't have to go through and do the rankings like they do now. And so we could hopefully repurpose that time to better train them as site reps. They can help double check the data entry. So still having that function there, but maybe repurposing how we use RACs in this process. So that is the selection criteria database that we're considering. Should this be implemented, we would also be then offering sessions to educate the membership as a whole, because this is what we would be using for all of our team sports. We still have some kinks to work out with tennis and some of our others that use, golf would still continue to use their platform. Tennis, we would work with the ITA some, just as functions a little bit differently. But that would be the plan for the selection criteria database, so that it would house all of our team sports, and then potential first implementation in September 2024 for our 24-25 championships. I still don't see any questions. Katie, have you seen anything?
Nope, no questions yet.
Perfect. Here I got one. You stated permissible flights would need new legislation, but also stated Champs is still working through what that would look like. What needs to happen first? Will Champs make legislative recommendations to management council or something? So I think the first steps that Mike, thank you for that question. The first steps on this would really be the championships committee putting some guidelines around when can you have a permissible flight? Is it conference opponents in the first and second round? So we would separate them. Would it be that you could separate top regionally ranked teams? So you're sending them someplace else. Is it if you tell a committee that they have 2 extra flights, well, how does that then turn into 3 or 4? So I think the first steps is going to be really getting some solid guardrails that our championship managers can use, so that we're consistent from sport to sport of when flights are created and that we're all working on the same set of guidelines. And then once we can get that, then we would be able to potentially look at past brackets and say, if we had implemented these flights, these changes would have been made, and that will help us to get a potential budget impact. So I think those will be the next steps that we have with really considering this permissible flights concept. And I think some of the I'm just making sure I answered your whole question, Mike. The legislative recommendations, it would just come from, in that aspect, it would come from the championships committee to the management council to make that. But we'll also be asking some of those types of questions in the survey to get feedback on from the membership. Thank you for that question. The last slide that I have before I'll open up to just other questions that you might have is just the general timeline. So since all of these budget items and the selection criteria database have budget implementations, we will be sending again another survey out in late October or early November for feedback. We will be able to have that open through mid-November, and then we will have the results for the Champs Committee to review in December. We'll be able to look at them then, digest them, and then we will have our February meeting in 2024, where we will look to make recommendations fully for the FY 25-26 budgets to then hit the governance cycle of SPFC, Management Council, and such. So that's the timeline for all of these since they have budget implications. What other questions do you have? None? I'm kind of shocked. If there aren't any more, I'm happy to answer questions. If you can email me, happy to chat through them. Like Katie I had said earlier, that this PDF will be on .org later today. The recording will be out by the end of the week. And if there's no other questions, thank you all for joining.
Laura, we actually just got one more.
All right. All right. The rush to roll out in 24 suggests that it didn't. Are you meaning for the selection criteria database? I believe that's what you're talking about. I don't know that we say, I mean, that's just the earliest that it could be. I think that when we see some of the feedback from sport committees, that's just saying, basically, because we were in the process, it wasn't happening for this year, if for 23-24. So the earliest implementation it could be for 24. I think as we're reviewing and seeing what it's going to take from a standpoint of getting the data, making sure everything works, that, you know, maybe it is 24, 25 that, or sorry, 25, 26 that it is. I'm just stating that the earliest it would go into implementation is 24. We do understand that schedules are usually done far in advance, and so that can be considered while we're discussing it. It's just it wouldn't happen earlier than 2024.